Hi, welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for watching. Well, we continue our series of interviews with the candidates seeking election to the 3 state row offices. I know, Treasurer, Auditor General, and today, one of the candidates for Attorney General, and then Dr. Stuart Shapiro is in the House. What else? The big decision that Governor Corbett has to make about Medicaid expansion, what we do with it. Maybe Dr. Shapiro will help us figure it out. All of that and more following these words.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Hi, welcome back to the program. We're going to get right to it. We have David Freed. He's a district attorney in Cumberland County, a longtime prosecutor. He's running for the post of Attorney General. Mr. Freed, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
All right, we're going to get through a bunch of things. Look, the Attorney General has a wide sweep of responsibilities when it comes to, prosecuting lawbreakers, but almost every Attorney General has a niche. For some, it's going after, sexual predators. For others, it's healthcare fraud. In addition to, I know that you're going to have to prosecute, and be vigilant about a whole range. Do you have a couple of areas that you want to talk about that you would focus if you're elected Attorney General?
I do. Number one, special victims. So the most vulnerable victims in society, children and the elderly. I think there's a way to ramp up what we're doing and frankly, in terms of elder abuse, combine some of the efforts of consumer protection and the criminal side to go after people that are financially abusing our elders. So that's one. Number two, got to make the Attorney General's office the leader on cyber crimes. Just talking to somebody before I walked in here, in any case, any criminal case certainly, we could take a cell phone, a tablet, a personal computer. The only thing that limits us from doing that is time and resources. So the AG's office needs to lead in resources. We need to lead in training, investigative techniques, because that's where this business is going. The criminals are ahead of us.
Well, that's true.
And number three, what I see around this Commonwealth, I've seen it in my own county, and I see it in a lot of places, is certainly we've got a drug problem, but the growth of the synthetic drugs and bath salts. We went after that with a legislative solution. We got a great ban on certain formulations. They've been reformulated, put right back out there on the streets. So I think the Attorney General needs to lead there, not only getting them off the streets, finding out where they're being produced, where they're coming from, and cracking down on that.
Yeah, one of the things, this whole business about identity theft, and it seems like, well, it's just another one of those sort of harmless crimes. Nobody's physically injured, but folks have to spend months and months trying to get their, figure out. And, that's really tough to prosecute because often the criminals aren't even in our state. They're not even in our country, right?
Right. They're difficult and they're complicated. Yeah. And, one of the things we have to do sometimes is ask for help from our federal friends who are sometimes better suited to do these cases. But the identity theft statute in Pennsylvania is actually a pretty good statute, and it allows recovery of restitution for the money people have had to spend to try to recover their finances. And that's unusual. Usually you can only get restitution for exactly what was taken.
Well, not from what it cost you to...
Right. Yeah. You can't get mileage to the courthouse. You can't get money for your day, for the days you've had to take off. In identity theft, you can't. But the interesting thing in something like identity theft or power of attorney fraud is it's not enough for us just to prove that the money was gone. We've got to prove where it went. And that's where the Attorney General is in a unique position to help with these cases, using investigative grand juries, getting the records, doing the forensic accounting to prove that money trail. Yeah,
I want to pursue, in this segment, but certainly in the next segment, a couple of the big areas. But, one of the things that we know, based from what Attorney General Tom Corbett did, is this huge number of prosecutions for what we call public corruption.
Right.
And, how vigilant do you think the Attorney General should be? Historically, most of those prosecutions had been done by the Dauphin County DA or by the feds. Right. Tom Corbett was the first Attorney General that actually looked into the legislature and looked in. What do you perceive as your role in looking at the public corruption stuff, whether it's campaign using public dollars, that was the argument here, or other kinds? And that takes a lot of staff. That's just not. Go ahead.
It's a very important role for the office, and it's in the statute. It's indicated that public corruption is one of the areas that the Attorney General can and should look into. Everything in prosecution in 2012 and going into 2013 is a resource issue, and any chief prosecutor has to set priorities and put assets to areas of greatest need. Now, it's my fondest hope that we've cleaned up what was going on in Harrisburg, and maybe we won't have to spend as much time on that. But any chief prosecutor has to make that decision of what are the most pressing problems and putting those assets to areas of greatest need.
All right, we're going to run to a break. When I come back, you as well as your opponent both have said that you would review the investigation into the Penn State sexual abuse scandal. You would review the investigation, not conduct your own. Both of you have said that. I want to talk with you about what you perceive, if you're elected, what your role would be after we pay some bills. Back in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by BetterSaferRoads.com. To voice your support for safer highways and less traffic congestion, visit BetterSaferRoads.com. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Hi, welcome back to the program with David Freed. He's the district attorney in Cumberland County, and he's now running, he's the Republican candidate to be the state's next attorney general. Let's talk a little bit about, this Penn State sexual abuse scandal. There's lots of controversy over it. Some people think, Governor Corbett, when he was attorney general, didn't put enough investigators on. He has indicated, and I've talked to him about it, that these investigations take time. We had to get all the ducks in line. Then others say, well, you were running for re-election or for election to governor. You didn't want to get into all this Penn State stuff. If you're elected, and obviously you've already said you'll review it, what do you think the next attorney general ought to do about reviewing the investigation? And am I using the right word, reviewing the investigation?
I think review is an appropriate term. Okay. I have said from the outset about this case that any responsible prosecutor is going to look at a high-profile case like this to see what could have been done better, what could have been done differently. So I think, and there's some major distinctions between my opponent and myself when we talk about this case. When I talk about reviewing the case, obviously there's a lot of public interest and people want to know what happened. Now certainly some of that came out in the trial, and in one sense the proof's in the pudding and the result speaks for itself. But what I've said is I can't comment on the questions that are out there.
Because you haven't had the facts yet?
Exactly.
You've not done
until I read all of the testimony, until I read all of the investigative reports, and frankly talk to the people involved in the case, you don't know why it went the way it went. Now ultimately it was a successful result, and you can't have it both ways. You can't say this is a blockbuster case and then criticize the case in the same breath. So I'm not going in there with any preconceived notion about what we're going to show.
Yeah, I mean, one of the concerns I think that the critics have, and I certainly understand this point of view, is that there were, young kids, being sexually abused, and which is horrible, and we all agree there, and that if it wasn't vigorously pursued enough, then there were victims here. I mean, that's the other side of that, and I think I think you would agree that's a really valid concern. And that's what an investigation, go ahead.
I understand that perfectly, and the easy thing to do as a chief law enforcement officer is file a charge.
Right.
The hard thing to do is to gather the evidence, tell people you're not ready yet, and absolutely the concern with any investigation. I was talking to somebody this morning about an ongoing investigation where there's somebody walking around that we believe is guilty of something, but we don't have the evidence yet to prove it. And with this Penn State case, boils down to high-profile defendant, delayed report, lack of physical evidence. You better build a strong case or you are not going to win in court. It's just that simple.
In general, you mentioned this, I think, earlier. How important, generically, would you put your office's responsibility for sexual abuse cases? I mean, are they primarily a county role first, and where would you place the Attorney General's role in the context of how to pursue those sorts of cases?
I don't want to get too far in the weeds because in one sense it depends on the charge. There are certain things that the Attorney General has primary jurisdiction over. unlawful contact with a minor, a lot of the technology-related things that you've seen the Attorney General's office do in the past. Then there are the cases that come via referral or resource issue, as Sandusky did, which was a referral to the AG's office. But in any event, the Attorney General is the Chief Law Enforcement Officer of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and should lead on all the major issues. So the resources need to be there in the AG's office to make sure that if the prosecutors doing the case need assistance, the AG can step in, provide that assistance, or do the case if need be. So I would say the office needs to lead on all the big issues.
Before you go, I know this may be a sensitive subject, but I feel going to ask it. There's this ad by an outside group. You've responded to it, but I don't know that a lot of folks in our viewership would be familiar with it. It's an ad run by an outside group. They've run ads before in past races. In this case, accusing your opponent of going easy, I'll put it that way, on a rape case, and that the victim may have been more damaged by the fact that she went easy. This is the allegation, and it apparently looks like, given what the victim's father said, that this was not the case. And you have said on the record that it's not you didn't do it. You want to further just because it is coming up in the news. It's something that I think, ask you.
Frankly, Terry, the other side's done a pretty good job tying it to me.
Right.
But it's not my ad. It's not the ad I would have run, and I'm disappointed with it. And I'm disappointed with any outside ad that is not factual, and because it takes away from both my opponent's opportunity and my opportunity to be talking about what we think are the bigger issues in this race. Yeah. So we understand this is a big race. There's going to be outside spending on both sides, but I would hope that it's factual and fair.
Okay. Would you go so far as to say it shouldn't be run? Have you said that? I mean, you said you're disappointed.
It's not for me to support or denounce it. I just didn't have anything to do with it.
All right. Now, there's one question that I have to ask you. And I know, why would we ask this before someone's in the office? You folks that get into this office always look above and say, I want to be governor. And look at all the predecessors in the office, from Governor Corbett to Mike Fisher to a former Attorney General who's now in the court, to Ernie Prieto, who unfortunately spent some time in prison. Right. But, what do you think about Dave Freed's long-term ambitions here?
Well, there's one of those former attorneys general who's really close to me who didn't run for governor. Yeah. And I consider myself much more in that camp.
Okay, I got it. All right, look, thanks for coming. Good luck. All right, coming up, guess what? The governor has to make a big decision about Medicaid expansion. About 450,000 people in the state could be eligible for Medicaid if the governor decides to go along with that. Stuart Shapiro will be in the House, and we'll talk about that after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the State System of Higher Education. 14 state-owned universities. The state system is the largest provider of higher education in Pennsylvania. And by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, working towards a healthy Pennsylvania.
Hi, welcome back to the program. Well, Dr. Stuart Shapiro joins me. We're going to talk about two big things. One is Medicaid expansion. I want to ask him about insurance exchanges and where they're going, and maybe apology legislation, if we can get into that. But the big thing, Dr. Shapiro, is simply this. The governor has a decision to make about whether to expand Medicaid coverage to about 450,000 Pennsylvanians who don't have it, under the decision reached by the Supreme Court, which upheld the constitutionality of the Affordable Care Act, otherwise known as the Obamacare. Where is that now in the process of being reconciled, being agreed upon, being rejected? Where does it stand?
Well, first, Terry, thanks for having me on again.
Sure.
Because I always deal in facts and not slogans.
Right.
So let's deal with the facts. Pennsylvania currently pays a larger percentage of its budget to Medicaid than 48 other states. That's because we've expanded entitlements over the last decade in Pennsylvania, which this governor has put a stop to that expansion. The governor is now faced with the same choice that the other governors are, and that is, do they expand Medicaid under Obamacare? And if you look at what this governor's philosophy is, which is, let's be prudent with our finances, and he's right, and let's spend money on priorities of the must-haves of our state, and he's been doing that. You have to come to the conclusion that you have to think very, very carefully about whether you should expand Medicaid. If the state decided to expand Medicaid under Obamacare, there is a myth that the federal government would pay for all of that expansion. They will pay close to 100% are those that are brand new, that are above the poverty level for the first 2 years, and then it tapers and gets ratcheted back. So that's going to cost the state about $700 million over the next 5 years. There's a bigger problem, and that is the state already has 2.2 million people on Medicaid. And that doesn't include all of those that are eligible today who would probably be, because of all the marketing, signing up for it going forward. Right. That would add $1.3 billion. So the state's current Medicaid expenditures are just under it's about $9 billion. Yeah.
State and federal about $24 billion.
Right, but state about $9 billion.
Right.
You would add $2 billion more, almost a 25% increase in Medicaid spending without any cost of living increases for the providers.
Right.
So the governor has to really look very carefully.
Cost.
At the cost.
It's a cost factor.
As you know, I've been working on health insurance for 30 years.
Sure.
But right now, in the recession we're in, the question is, where do we prioritize our dollars? And now may not be the time to do a massive expansion.
Well, let's look at some other aspects of it. Hospitals are now close to $1 billion in uncompensated care, a good bit of it. And nursing homes have a huge proportion of their budgets covered by Medicaid, right?
Right.
By Medicaid. So how does that all fit in? And then you have these, I'll use a number, 450,000, 460,000 Pennsylvanians that would be eligible who wouldn't have health care coverage at all. I'm just pointing this out, something you already know, but go ahead.
But let's be clear.
Go ahead.
We have a problem with health insurance in our society. We don't have a problem with health care. People get the health care they need. And if we expand Medicaid, because the pot of dollars, the state can't manufacture that $2 billion new dollars. Many of the disabled individuals in this state are going to have to wait longer for services. The elderly are going to have to wait. Kids are going to have to wait. And he's going to need to he's going to need to delay services in order to meet a new expansion. We just shouldn't be expanding entitlements at this time.
All right. When we come back, I want to ask Stuart Shapiro about tort reform apology legislation. It's another huge issue. We'll be back after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by Highmark Blue Shield, changing the way health plans work for business with a variety of plan options for employers and more choices for employees. Information is available at highmark.com. Have a greater hand in your company's health. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, the future of long-term care.
Back to the program. We're talking with Dr. Stuart Shapiro about health care reform. We talked about Medicaid expansion, whether it should go or not go. We're now going to turn our attention to a couple of aspects of tort reform. All right, Dr. Shapiro, at this point, Pennsylvania, I know a lot of doctors and a lot of folks in the medical community want a cap on non-economic damages, and pain and suffering. Takes a constitutional amendment in this state. Doesn't look like it's gone anywhere. Do you have any, what's your latest on it?
We need tort reform in Pennsylvania. Right now, if you look at the way states are rated, Delaware is rated the best state in the nation in terms of lawsuit abuse reform. There has been good reform there.
Right.
Pennsylvania has been getting worse and worse and worse when compared to the other states. And West Virginia is now rated the worst in the country. Mm-hmm. Pennsylvania is slipping closer and closer and closer to being rated just like West Virginia. Right now, we are worse than every other surrounding state. A critical piece of legislation which passed the House, for example, 18 months ago, is sitting in the Senate, is called apology legislation. Yeah. Right now, doctors and hospitals and their workers, when something unfortunate happens, maybe someone didn't even make a mistake, they tend to be told, don't talk about it.
Because they're afraid it will be used against them in a lawsuit?
Correct.
Is that it?
And so what they do is they don't talk about it. Yeah. The families get mad and the families sue. The family are not upset about the outcome. Not every outcome is perfect, and people understand that. Sure. What they are mad about is that people don't say, I'm sorry.
That's a great point. Look, I've talked to some physicians about this, who love their patients and love their work, and they say, it would be nice if I could just sit down and say, look, this is what happened. Maybe it was not my fault. Go ahead.
Sued. And data from across the country, 40 states have this now, has shown that this dramatically reduces lawsuit abuse in the state. Right. Simple thing. Senate could pass it. They're coming back in next week.
This seems not controversial. What's the problem in the Senate? Do you have any clue?
The trial lawyers are a very effective lobby, and they have pushed the Senate to the limit to not pass this. This is common sense reform.
Is that because they think that's a tool they can use in a case? Obviously
they do use it, and they use it now, as you said, because if a doctor says, I'm sorry, he may have done nothing wrong. Yeah. But it leads to a court case, and that takes up time. So if you simply could say, sorry about the outcome, this is what happened. Yeah. Lawsuits would be reduced. Common sense reform, every state surrounding us has it. It makes sense, and it would reduce and make Pennsylvania it would help recruit doctors to Pennsylvania.
And we're losing.
And it would reduce our costs.
50% of the doctors within 10 years reach, quote, the retirement age, rather retire, that's another matter. And we already have we're about out of time, primary physician problem, right?
Absolutely.
So it's all interrelated, correct?
Absolutely.
All right, we don't have time now, but I want you to come back, and we're going to do an update on these insurance exchanges and what that will mean for the folks who don't have coverage now but who are eligible for it under the Affordable Care Act. Look, we'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, stay well.